Hello students, how's everybody doing? Today is January 29th, 2021, the year of COVID, as we continue this pandemic, and I am your professor, Associate Professor of History, Armando Villarreal the third, and this will be a lecture, the third lecture for History 1302, a continuation of the Progressive Era. Remember, we closed the West, we talk about industry, we talked about immigrants, and now we're going to talk a little bit about. We talked a little bit about labor, and I'm going to touch on a couple of things on labor, and then we're gonna keep on we're gonna keep on going. I'm going to make sure that we covered everything that I think we did with immigrants, and we're going to move on. It's a little refreshing for the previous lecture, and I don't know if I covered these things in depth or not, and so I will go over them again. We talked about a little bit about labor unions, and I'm not going to cover too much on labor unions, but labor unions were seen as an evil back then. Most of the people that were in these labor unions were workers, and most of these workers came from Europe. Okay, um, and unions or collective unions or mutual aid societies or anything like that is always attractive to poor people or people of how can I say it in Spanish we say gente del pueblo, which translates into people of not the city but people of the people of the community. Okay, that's what it is, and they're seen as bad because labor unions attract a lot of socialists and a lot of anarchists. Okay, now socialism and anarchism and communism are those words that people here in the United States love to use and throw around, but they have no idea what they mean. Okay, they say you're a communist, Marxist, socialist. Sometimes they combine them all together. Like one of the things that is the recent trend is that they like to say that a socialist and a fascist are the same thing, and well, they're all different political. Some of them are different political ideologies. Some of them are different forms of government. Okay, we're not going to talk about those right now. Maybe we'll talk about those when we talk about the Cold War. Um, the reason that labor unions get a bad rap, okay, it's going to be because of things like the Haymarket Square bombing, and I want you to look that up. The Haymarket Square bombing will be on your exam, okay. Basically, it's there is a type of a getting together, a protest of labor agitators in Chicago, and somebody chunks a crude bomb. And we also had the Homestead Riot with Carnegie Steel. Now, believe it or not, after the Homestead Riot, one of the reasons that Carnegie decides to sell was because of the Homestead Riot. And by the time the Homestead Riot happened, um, even though Carnegie is in charge, is the owner of Carnegie Steel, he decides that he is going to perhaps sell Carnegie Steel, and he ends up selling it to J.P. Morgan, and J.P. Morgan then buys Carnegie Steel and creates U.S. Steel. Okay, um, that in itself, that deal in itself, is really cool. Pretty much they have lunch together, and Andrew Carnegie scribbles what he thinks he's worth on a piece of paper, and what he just gives it to J.P. Morgan, and J.P. Morgan says okay, doesn't even look at it, and Andrew Carnegie says, well, if I'd known it was going to be this easy, I would have asked you for double what I asked you, and he would have said, and I would have paid you for it. J.P. Morgan's idea was that the only thing he wanted to do was monopolize the steel industry in the United States, and nothing other than that. Okay. The other thing is the Pullman strike, right? Now, in the Pullman strike, what happens, people, is that the president gets involved. Why does the president get involved in the Pullman strike? Well, it's very easy why the president gets involved in the Pullman strike, because the railroads says it's like, air traffic controllers going on strike, or uh, air. Yeah, I said air traffic controllers, or pilots going on strike, or U.S. postal workers going on strike, or uh, anything that has to do with the federal government. The president can get involved. If I'm not mistaken, when the air traffic controllers went on strike, I think Reagan fired them or threatened to fire them. I don't. I have to go back and read my notes. Okay. Um, and Pullman was a car. It was a Pullman car. That was the fanciest car that you could ride on. I remember when we were children, they would say we're going to go to Mexico in the Pullman car, and we would go from Laredo to Monterrey or Mexico City in a Pullman car, and it was very fancy. Like your whole family would rent one car, or one or two families would have these exclusive cars. It was actually relatively cheap, and it was a lot of fun. Uh, uh, Now we also have Sacco and Vanzetti, who were anarchists. I mean, these individuals were card-carrying anarchists. That doesn't make them bad people. That just means that that's a political ideology that they follow, and they're accused of shooting a policeman and robbing, and it's not. It's not. They were innocent, and it's an American tragedy, but they were very easy targets because number one, they were foreigners. I got an itch on my leg. They were foreigners, and number two, they were Eastern European. They were from Eastern Europe, so they were very, very easy scapegoats in this time of xenophobia. So, by the way, those of you that haven't decided what you want to write about, those four things are really good. Uh, and remember, you don't have to read a book. You can watch a couple of videos for your paper and write something on something interesting like this. Uh, when it comes to immigrants, I wanted to make sure that I talked about Jacob Briss and how the other half lives. Jacob Briss is actually a journalist, a photographer that goes out and takes pictures of these immigrants and how they live. And then he presents it to auxiliary clubs and to people. A lot of people think that he exploited the poor. And that is, in a sense, one of the things that happens, that you'll see individuals taking, handing out food to the poor and taking a picture while they're doing it. That's awfully disgusting when you do that. Go up to somebody and give them something and don't tell anybody about it. Okay, that's how you do things. That you know, uh, trust an individual who does kind things when nobody's looking. Not when all eyes are on you. When you're on your best behavior, or when you go and you decide to pay something forward and you post it all over Facebook. It's like these two elderly ladies were having breakfast and I paid for their breakfast. Well, it doesn't mean anything now because you did it for yourself. So a lot of people think that even though Jacob Riss did do some good to bring light on how horrible the conditions of the poor were in New York, a lot of people feel that he rose to fame and fortune on the backs of these poor people. And maybe perhaps it was, maybe perhaps it wasn't. I used to have students read the books, but of course we are dealing with COVID right now, and uh, uh, it's hard enough just executing the class. All right, so there you have 5 things that you can write on if you still haven't decided what to write on, which would be the Homestead Riot, Sacco and Vanzetti, Haymarket Square bombing, the Pullman strike, and of course Jacob Riss and how the other half lives. I think I have the book here. No, I may have it in my office. It's a teeny little book, and a real easy book to read. So we talked about women and gender and reform, and now let's talk about technology, health, crime, and mass consumption, because this is going to be the age of mass consumption. This is, in order for a society to be successful, it has to mass consume. There's got to be mass consumption, and the mass consumption can never stop. Okay, it's got to continue on and on and on and on. So we're getting out of this idea of where individual craftsmen do things, and we're getting into the time where things are mass produced. interchangeable parts. A Ford rolls off the assembly line every 14 minutes. We're talking about credit instead of installment and layaway payments. So this is a time period where things are beginning to change dramatically for people in the United States, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that make these things change. Okay, well, we can Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone, so that's going to mean that people can communicate with each other, not the way we can communicate now. Okay, we have Thomas Edison. Um, Electricity, actually, there's going to be a big quarrel between Alexander Graham Bell and Westinghouse. Okay, not Alexander Graham Bell. I'm sorry, by Thomas Edison and Westinghouse. And actually, Westinghouse had the better way of bringing electricity to us instead of Edison. But Edison actually demonizes Westinghouse. One of the ways he does it is by uh, electrocuting an elephant. You can actually look it up online. And that's one of. So we have that. We have Marconi in the radio. Of course, the Wright brothers and their airplane, but nothing like now. I mean, still, the airplane will be in its relative infancy until well into after World War II. After World War II is when we begin to have, passenger airlines. Now, George Bissell and Drake, Edwin Drake, very important. And here you go. Something else you can write about. They're in the petroleum industry, and the way that they revolutionize is that they're involved in the cracking of petroleum, in the distillation of petroleum. Out of 1 gallon of crude, they're able to extract different, petroleum distillates that they can use for different things. Everywhere from tar pitch, regular tar, to anesthetics. And that in itself is incredibly important, okay? We have Charles Otto, who develops the four stroke engine, which is the engine that we use now. The four stroke engine lasts a lot longer, it's a lot more efficient, but it is not as powerful, okay? You gotta have four strokes to have one revolution, as to where a two-stroke engine, you have two strokes to one revolution, and the revs are a lot higher. So if you want to know the difference between a four-stroke and a two-stroke, it's very simple. Okay, and this will probably be an extra credit question: is if you have a two-stroke engine, 99% of the time you have to add oil into the crankcase in order to provide lubrication, and they're very loud, and they pollute a lot. Okay, and that's mostly weed eater engines, chainsaws, uh, boat engines. Now you don't have two-stroke boat engines anymore. They have done away with them. All you have is these huge four-stroke engines. Also, two-stroke engines are smaller, and that's why you happen to see two-stroke engines on chainsaws and on weed eaters and on some motorcycles. A lot of revolution. Very powerful. Okay. Henry Ford and the science of production, the assembly line, that's going to be very important. Um, how do these inventions change the United States and the world forever? Well, I mean, look at the car. I mean, it would be impossible for us to, especially in Texas, to imagine life without an automobile. I would like to, in my time, to see a super rail. It'd be so nice when all this is over to be able to get on a speed train and go to Austin to a concert. Be there in an hour and a half, and then come back. You know, and then just go from the park and ride to the house. That'd be so great to do that. Um, so, in a sense, I'm not going to ask you how these inventions changed everything forever, but these are some of the inventions that happened. Of course, I've missed hundreds of them, but that is, you know, philanthropy, health, and social awareness. Okay. Now, what we've got here is we're going to talk about Carnegie and the Gospel of Wealth. Carnegie starts saying that they're making so much money that they need to give some of this money back. I think he just felt guilty, really. Okay. Now, there's an author by the name of George. I forget his name. I want to say he's Lloyd, but he's not Lloyd George. That's World War I guy from England. He argues in a book called Progress and Poverty. He says, if we've got this monumental amount of progress going on, then we shouldn't have poverty. You know, with progress, we should be able to uplift everybody. But we know we can't do that. We can, but not everybody expects the same from life, okay? Um, there's also Dreiser's sister Kerry, which is also very important. Now, Sister Carrie has to do with. Now, Sister Carrie is about a young lady. I think she's from rural America. It's been so long since I've read the book. But she comes to the city and she becomes mistress to men who she perceives are superior to her. And then eventually she becomes an actress, okay? Um, I'm not gonna say it's yeah, you know, I'm getting confused. I always get Sister Carrie confused with a Great Gatsby, you know. But this is the time that all of this is going to start to go on. Uh, we talked about Jacob Risch and immigrant exploitation and the exploitation of individuals who we feel that uh, if we help, we need to say or do something about it, when in reality we shouldn't be doing that. We are also going to have the rise of public health service consumer leagues. Um, those are very important, even now on Facebook. You notice that on Facebook you can get a lot of what you want from companies if you go to their Facebook sites and you put there that they gave you bad service. They'll be more apt to be nice to you. He's in my face turned green and red because of the television. Advances in medicine, or aspirin, X-ray, blood transfusion. Blood transfusions, still not very good. Uh, Finally, we start to wash our hands in instrument sterilization. The Kellogg brothers with diet and nutrition, and laboratory analysis. Imagine that. So you've got Madame Curie with X-rays. Forget the guy who did the blood transfusions. He actually kills himself because he actually does them to himself. Instrument sterilization. Believe it or not, nurses during the Civil War were advocating the sterilization of instruments as far as the 1860s, but men would not listen to them at all. They would say, "Nah, y'all are crazy. You don't have to sterilize, you know." And then, of course, as I said, the Kellogg brothers with diet and nutrition. Um, and that's why you have, cereals and stuff. You can't eat, bacon for breakfast, lunch, and dinner all the time. You have to be more of a varied diet, instead of just eating, even though it's a lot of fun to just eat, bacon for breakfast, lunch, and dinner all the time. Now, some of the things that I'm gonna just go over just very lightly are the last three things that we're going to talk about, which is going to be progressives, populists, and then we're going to talk about the Spanish American War. And that the Spanish American War, you're pretty much going to be on your own. You're going to have to read about it on your own. Okay? Beginning in the 1870s, there's a lot of people in rural America that start to complain about the way that farmers are being treated. And they feel that the United States government is focusing on the big cities. They're focusing on big cities, and they're focusing on individuals who, for the most part, live in the city. That they're neglecting, that they are neglecting uh, the farmers. So what they end up doing, students, what they end up doing is the following: that they end up starting this huge cooperative. They end up starting a cooperative of farmers. Okay, and the questions that they had is like, we'll see, like, they feel that because they're the people that are feeding America, that they should be treated with the utmost importance and respect. They want their economic interest and their way of life protected. Okay, and unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Lastly, we're going to see briefly who these populists are. Why are they so appealing to farmers? And why do they change American politics? Because they do change it, but not it's not a permanent change, but a change that I guess would have a permanent lasting impact on, American agricultural society. Now, there's going to be labor alliances, the Farmers and Laborers, Northwest Farmers Alliance, I believe, and the Colored Farmers National Alliance. The problem is that they never were big enough to do anything cohesively until one organization comes along, and it's called the Grange. Okay, it was the National Grange of Patrons of Husbandry. Men and women were allowed in it. African Americans were allowed in it. Uh, and the membership was up to 800,000. Now, they set up cooperative grain elevators, warehouses, insurance companies, and they eventually became populist. They supported the Populist Party. Now, the great thing about these people was that they what they did is that they pooled their money together, and they would, when the price of wheat was not real good, they would tell all the farmers, don't worry about selling your wheat right now. Let's just pool it together in our grain elevators, and let's wait until the price of wheat is good, and then we'll sell it. And in the meantime, since you're a member of the Grange, we will lend you the money so you can make the payments on your farm and on your house, right? And that's how they help each other out. That's a mutual aid society, sociedad mutualista. You see a lot of these organizations sometimes in Mexican neighborhoods in the United States where they pool their money together. Then if somebody dies, and they help them bury that, or the money could be used for appliances or to fix a car, or you name it. Okay. Now, one of the things that exacerbates the Grange is the last land thrust in Oklahoma, because a lot of these people are already out there, and they feel that all these newcomers are going to put a lot of pressure on them. Okay, and so that does become an issue. Now, the main critiques of the populist are that the American legal system placed too much emphasis on property rights. That monopolies were an economic social evil. Things are right. That social Darwinism. Sorry, I didn't mean to yawn there. And laissez-faire were bankrupt ideologies. That industrial society had turned individuals into economic commodities, and we are. We are economic commodities. I mean, I'm a college professor and I have a going rate, and my degree says, this is how much you command for you. So we all have literally a barcode on the back of our head that says how much we're worth, uh, you know, um, economically, and that wealth is unevenly distributed. And I agree with those things. I agree with every single thing that they mention is true, but The question is, how do we get around it? How do we get out of this system? Now, they were involved in elections. Their candidate was William Jennings Bryan, and he was nominated for president both by the Democrats and the Populists in 1896. And he delivered his Cross of Gold speech, which called for the unlimited coinage of silver. And we do. In the Sherman Silver Act, we decide that we're going to buy all the silver and coin it. We think the more, if gold's only in circulation, there's only so much gold, but later on, if we coin all the silver, then everybody will have money, and basically what that's going to create is inflation. Okay, so that doesn't work out real well. Okay, but he does almost win the election. Okay, and that was a very, very, very close call for the Republicans and a wake up call for Democrats. Okay, um, now of course he holds that the government should protect individuals and the democratic process against the growing power of monopolies. Bryan loses to William McKinley on who ran on a platform, I believe, that said prosperity to all. Now, again, like I said, what are we going to do about progressivism? Populists. What are we going to give them? Well, the Sherman Antitrust Act under Harrison, and then the Sherman Silver Act also is something else, because they do mine. We do go into bimetallism. The problem is that it's going to create a depression, because it's going to be too much money in circulation, and the money's not going to have any value. We're going to have a depression in 1893. The Sherman Antitrust Act, well, there's always a way to get out of that, because later on it's crippled in United States versus E.C. Knight and Company. So even though the Sherman Antitrust Act was good, later on the Supreme Court says that even though it's not completely unconstitutional, it does have some issues with it. Now, what happens here is that who ends up suffering? Well, of course, it's the people. They're the ones that are doing without any money in 1893, and then Grover Cleveland becomes the president after William McKinley is assassinated, and then again William Howard Taft. I think is it William Howard Taft? I forget. I don't remember. No, it's not William Howard Taft. I'm gonna have to check. Don't quote me on that one. Hold on. Let me check who's president after Grover Cleveland. Wilson becomes the president. I think. Yeah, it says 1894. Republicans gain control of the House. Cleveland will be the last Democratic president until the election where Woodrow Wilson is elected. Okay, so give me a second. I knew I was getting confused because I forgot that Grover Cleveland was president twice. So it's Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson, and then Warren Harding. Okay? So Grover Cleveland was president after Chester Arthur, and then Benjamin Harrison is president, and then Grover Cleveland is president again. Okay, enough of that. We call these lackluster presidents in reality because they didn't do a whole bunch. Uh, like Taft never wanted to be president. He wanted to be a Supreme Court justice. Theodore Roosevelt does do a lot of good. But, you do have some presidents here that, the reason I always get them confused is because I always forget what they did. You have Chester Arthur before Chester Arthur, who replaces Garfield, and then uh, Grover Cleveland that replaces Chester Arthur, but then loses an election and then becomes president again, and then McKinley becomes president. He gets assassinated, and Theodore Roosevelt becomes the president. So it's just a question of keeping them in line, and that's why we have uh, our telephones, right? And that was a picture of James Buchanan. There you go, a picture of Buchanan there. Another lackluster, probably one of the worst presidents we've ever had, because he did nothing about the slavery issue. Okay, I don't want to lose my steam here. Um, Now, what about progressives? Who are the progressives? So we have populists that are the urban. So now we need a thread of individuals that do stuff in the cities. Okay, which we may want to call these radical agitators or limousine liberals, or I don't know what you want to call them, right? But there's also an argument that we're always progressing, that we're always in a progressive period in the United States because we're always moving forward. If we're always moving forward, then we're always in a progressive period, right? Um, Progressivism has usually become a bad word because most progressives tend to be very open-minded, you know, uh, open-minded to immigration and gender issues and stuff like that. I consider myself to be a progressive individual, but we'll talk about those things another day. Okay. Uh, Most progressives find support among small businessmen and professionals of the middle class. Most progressives are middle class individuals. Okay. Wealthy individuals don't like progressivism. In contrast to disgruntled farmers who fuel the populist movement. But in the end, both progressives and populists together will leave a lasting stamp on the United States. And like I said, progressivism still prevails in the United States. What we need to look at is that these are factors that have to do a lot with social, economic, and political issues. All right? And these are the things that are part of the progressive movement: socio, economic, and political. Okay? My kids are yelling outside. We also want to compare the goals of the progressives and the populists to see who is more successful. And I hate to break it to you, the progressives are going to be more successful. Okay? Now, a lot of people say that progressivism is the dawn of liberalism. And I tend to agree with that because progressivism, as we move along, becomes more and more liberal. And, and a lot of people don't like that. I tend to be fairly liberal. I tend to be a social liberal and a fiscal conservative. Okay, um, kind when it comes to people, a little tight when it comes to money. Okay, now the way that progressives believe that the government should work is that the government should be more active in the roles of people in making sure they're okay. But this is going to mean that the government knows more about you while this, they're going to know more about you. If the government helps you, then they're going to know more about you when it's going on. Social problems are susceptible to government legislation and action. That's true. How do you fix a problem? You throw money at it, right? Money fixes everything. I don't care what anybody says. People say that money doesn't buy happiness. No, it does. It really does. For the most part, most of us will be happy just to have enough money to pay our bills without having to worry about it and things like that. Now, the thing about progressives is that they're never a cohesive group. The the objectives are different, okay, to all of them. And sometimes they contradict each other. And that's why a lot of people get so irritated with progressives because, their goals may oftentimes be contradictory. At this time, when we're talking about now, progressives want to end white slavery, prostitution, and sweatshops. Okay, but they like to wear nice clothes, and where do you make this nice clothes? Well, you make it at the sweatshops. There you go. But they should be paying these people good money. That's what they say. Prohibition, the ending of alcohol, but then maybe they like to have a glass of wine themselves every once in a while. They want to allow immigrants to come in, but they want the immigrants to assimilate. They want the Americanization of immigrants, and they want restriction legislation, immigration restriction legislation. That is contradictory. You want immigrants to come in, but you've got this quota for them, and that is not cool because a lot of times the quotas are based on skin color. Okay, now antitrust legislation. I kind of like that. Okay, no big trust, no monopolies. Rate regulation of private utilities. If when you go to Europe, when you go to Mexico, utilities are owned by the government, by the people, and power costs the same. It's not like when you go to Sam and they ask you, who do you use your electric company? It's like, no, over there it's the same. Gasoline costs the same everywhere, because it's standardized. It's owned by the people, it's owned by the government. It's like the post office, okay? You know, uh, now full government ownership of private utilities. Currently the water is owned by the city or municipality, but the power and the gasoline and all that is not owned by the government. It should be. That women should be allowed to vote and no child labor. So they are gonna give us something. And the reason that they don't want kids working is not because they don't want little kids working because they can get hurt. They don't want kids working because then a kid's gonna work for less money than an adult will work for. And what's gonna happen here is that the kid is gonna undermine the family man. Okay. Destruction of destruction of urban political machines. That is never going to happen. Okay, ever, 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 ever going to happen. There's never going to be the banning of urban political machines because in order for politicians to get elected, they have to piggyback on other politicians. One of the reasons that Beto O'Rourke did not get elected is because one of the things that he refused to do was to get in cahoots with too many politicians, and you can't do that. You got to get in cahoots because they have money, and they give you money from their election coffers, and that's how you get elected. Okay, the more you put yourself out there, the better off you're going to be. Political reform, whatever that means, right? Whenever a politician tells you that he's going to do tax reform and political reform, do not listen to that because there's no such thing as political and tax reform. You can't, people. You cannot have political reform because you cannot have just plain Jane Joe Schmoes be in politics. The only good politician is an individual that's been in politics his whole life. You can't get somebody like me to just all of a sudden become the president of the United States. I have to clue what I'm doing. So what I'm talking about here is that you need to select a person for the job that this individual has been doing for a long time. Yeah, career politicians are crafty individuals. They're very powerful. They have a lot of skeletons, and they know that people have a lot of skeletons. They do a lot of behind the work scenes. They're always robbing Peter to pay Paul. They're hustling. They're like legal hustlers. But that's what they do to get. That's what they do. What they need to do to get things done for their constituents. Okay. At the end of the day, you don't care how your street is paved. You just want it paved. And the other thing is, don't ever complain about taxes because taxes gives you infrastructure. Taxes gives you school. Taxes give you roads. Taxes gives you policemen. Taxes gives you water. Taxes gives you firemen. Taxes gives you infrastructure. Okay? It's like, oh my God, I don't want to drive all the way to the other side of Fort Worth to go to the DPS office. Well, if you pay more taxes, then they may build one close to your house, okay? Or a really modern one like the one that they have over there in Arlington now that you can call, that they call you and they tell you when to leave your house. And as you're getting there, it tells you where in line you are. It's pretty sophisticated stuff, but that kind of stuff takes money. And that money comes from us, okay? Productive, tax-paying Americans. Yes. Okay, so now we're going to go into the American Empire, or the acquisition of the empire. Now, chapter 9, it's, I don't know if it's chapter 19 in the book, okay? It says chapter 19 here, but it's the one with the Spanish American War, okay? I'm unfamiliar with which one it is on America Narrative of History, or which one it is uh, in OpenStack, but it has to do with the Spanish American War. Now, I'm not going to cover this in great detail because, I'm going on 3 hours of lecture, and I don't want to lose more than I've already lost some of you, okay? That the main reason for the Spanish American War is that all of a sudden the United States wakes up. And by the time that they wake up, they say, oh my God, the rest of the world, primarily Great Britain, Germany, and France, have carved up the whole world. At this time, Great Britain owns about 25% of the globe, okay? In colonies, all right? Now, America has always been a continent of expansion, but we've expanded on the continent. When we reach the other end of the continent, then it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do now? Where are we going now? And what they do is that they say, well, in order for us to maintain our identity, we're going to have to go out there and have colonies of our own, okay? So, what they do is that they use a concept of social Darwinism. They use the concept, the old, you know, antiquated, racist, xenophobic concept of manifest destiny and social Darwinism. And then they read the books of an individual by the name of Alfred Thayer Mahan. Now, this guy is brilliant, okay? But he's a jingo. A jingo is an individual that is a saber rattler, is an individual that feels that the only way that the United States is going to be a complete country is if we go out and gang up on people and show everybody that we are the big. We're going to be a bully. That's basically it. And he writes 3 books: The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, The Influence of Sea Power Upon the French Revolution and Empire, and The Interest of America in Sea Power. I read the first one, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, and the last one, The Interest of Sea Power of America. Okay? And he argues that the only way that the United States is going to become a world power is if we have a strong merchant navy and a strong naval, just a strong navy, like warships, okay? And in order to be a world power, we have to be able to carry our goods, our trades, all over the world, okay, for profitable trading with Europe and Asia. And we have got to protect our merchant marine. Because in other times when we try to do that, we fell prey to pirates. And we said, we can't do that. So what happens here is that he says, look at Germany, look at England, and look at France. They've got huge navies. Look at what happened to Spain. When they defeated her navy, then they ceased to be a world power. Look at what happened to Portugal, okay? When they ceased to have a big navy, they were no longer a world power. Look at the Chinese. When they quit sailing the 7 seas, or they quit being a world power. So in order for us to be, we have to have a strong merchant marine and a strong navy. Now, by this time, the British control the Straits of Gibraltar, the Straits of Bosphorus, the Dardanelles, and the Suez Canal. Okay? So they can get in and out of the Mediterranean. So they can go from the Atlantic into the Mediterranean, and then they can go all the way to the Indian Ocean and then go to the Pacific. They don't have to go around Africa anymore like they used to have to do before. Now, the United States has got issues because if they want to go from New York to San Francisco, then they've got to go around Tierra del Fuego. They got to go all the way around the Cape of South America, right? Like they do with the Cape of South Africa. And what they end up doing is after the French are unsuccessful in building the Panama Canal, then Theodore Roosevelt promotes the building of the Panama Canal, and we only have to go down to Panama and then cut straight across, and then there is the Pacific. Okay, so instead of taking 3 months to make, 6 months to make that journey, we're looking at a month and a half to 2 months max to take our goods from New York through the Panama Canal, and then when we get through the Panama Canal, then we can go. If we need fuel, we can go up to Hawaii because those are going to be places that we're going to colonize, and then we can go right to Asia. Or we can go from San Francisco, refuel in Hawaii, and then make it to Asia. Okay? So we're going to need refueling points. We're going to need places where we're going to have to stop and get coal for these ships. Okay? You know, in a lot of cases, you have coal ships following the warships, but you can't always do that. You need coaling stations, okay? So we're going to look at places like the Philippines. We're going to look at places like Hawaii. We're going to look at places like the British Virgin Islands. We're going to look at places like Guam. You know, of course, we're going to look at Cuba. Now, Cuba is good. The problem with Cuba is going to be that it's too close to the United States. You know, I will say this, and I know that I will come under scrutiny for saying this, but the United States should have colonized Cuba, and they should have colonized Venezuela when we had the opportunity to do it. And we should have made them protectorates of the United States, maybe like Puerto Rico, okay, territories, or we should have just made them, you know, external states of that. Because if we had Venezuela, we'd had very little problems with petroleum. We wouldn't have to deal with OPEC. And if we had Cuba, we could go party there. I'm just kidding. But no, it's the problem with Cuba is it's too close to the United States for it to belong to somebody else. And it's a threat to the United States, okay? It's always been that. Now, I know that a lot of you are going to say, oh my God, Mr. V is an imperialist. I'm not a full imperialist at heart, but I think that you know, like Puerto Rico, we should treat Puerto Rico right. We should either let it become its own country, or we should make it a state. You know, we need to be fair, right? We can't just treat it like a stepchild, and we should do that. You know, maybe when Washington D.C. becomes its own state, then Puerto Rico can become a state. All right. Now, how do you sell this? Well, with Jingoism. Jingoism is the word means that you go around and, you know, kind of like fake news. You know, you go around and you spread lies in order to get what you want. And men like Mahan, Henry Cabot Lodge, Theodore Roosevelt, they're very eager to demonstrate the strength of the Navy. We spend so much money on the Navy that we need to demonstrate it, and we need to pick a fight with somebody. Now, we're not going to pick a fight with the British because we're not going to win. We're not going to pick a fight with the Germans because we are probably not going to win. And we're sure as hell not going to pick a fight with the French. And believe it or not, at this time, prior to this time, Mexico has a superior navy to the United States. However, after this, you know, naval building is encouraged, then what happens here is that the United States will have a superior navy. Now, what will happen is that now they need to show it. They need to show how great it is, and they basically pick a fight with Spain. Okay, McKinley, they pick a fight with Spain. There's incidents of atrocities that are being committed in Cuba, which are true, and in the Philippines. The problem is that eventually, what's going to happen um, is that the same techniques that the Spanish were using against the Filipinos and the Cubans, they're going to turn around and use them against the Americans are going to use them because they're guerrillas. So I want you to maybe tap into John Green and to look into this aspect of the Spanish American War. Basically, what happens is the United States gangs up on the Spanish. Theodore Roosevelt, leads a charge on San Juan Hill, mostly by Buffalo soldiers, African American soldiers. All this is fueled by the Yellow Press, by William Randolph Scott and sensationalist news. And what happens here is that the United States defeats Spain and, you know, takes her from being a world power. And now what we have now is that the United States has the Philippines and it has Hawaii. Well, we didn't take Hawaii from the Spanish. I'm sorry. It's got the Philippines. It's got Cuba and Puerto Rico. Okay. Now, after this is all done, okay, after the United States is triumphant in the Spanish American War, and I'm telling you again, you need to read about the Spanish American War. I mean, like I said, I'm going on 3 hours of lecture, so I'm gonna wrap it up here in about 7 to 10 minutes. The United States is the win with Spain is very swift. In Manila Harbor, okay, Admiral Dewey literally blows a Spanish ship out of the water. I mean, literally lifts it out of the water and then it sinks in Manila Harbor. Now, the United States is now more like European countries because they've got colonies now. They're no longer a republic equal in its parts because we're no longer confined to the United States, to the continent. We have got territories scattered everywhere. The quick victory has lasting psychological effects on a lot of people, believe it or not. I mean, this was not the blitzkrieg of Germany, but it still had a lasting impact. In the aftermath of the Spanish American War, the United States becomes a world power. It's still not going to be a superior power to that of Great Britain. That will not happen until after World War One and definitely after World War Two. Okay. Now we have Cuba, Guam, the Philippines, Wake, Puerto Rico, Hawaii. What we do in Hawaii is horrible. What we do to Queen Lily and what we do to Hawaiians. The way that we do that is that we need sugar. And so we send in missionaries, and then we try to convert people, and then when they don't, then we just force them to do that. It's a terrible, horrible story, um, and I could go on and on and on about this. I'm not going to say the progressivist era is incredibly long, but you are also responsible for reading a lot of this material or looking this up if you're interested on the Spanish American War. Okay, a lot of interesting things. The number one killer of American troops in the Spanish American War was disease. Okay, uh, and a lot of the things that the Spanish were dealing with, the Americans deal with, and the Americans resort to the same tactics that the Spanish were. I firmly believe that if the Spanish had not been as disease ridden as they were, the loss of American life would have been a lot greater. Okay, but there wasn't much left in the Spanish, both the Navy and the soldiers and Admiral Cervera. Now with the Spanish American War, what they're going to use as a catalyst to attack the Spanish is going to be the explosion of the battleship Maine. Okay, and I want you to read about that because they say that it hit a Cuban mine when in reality it wasn't. It was actually a design flaw, and that's why it blew up. It was not because of a mine, but because they put the boiler room next to the powder magazine, and it gets too hot and it blows up. Okay, so uh, what do we do with these islands? Do we give them back? Do we sell them? Do we let them govern themselves? There's going to be two amendments, the Teller and the Platt Amendment, that you are going to be responsible for. And of course, the United States is going to intervene in places like Venezuela. They're going to intervene in Panama in 1903, so we could eventually, lay down the Panama Canal. In Santo Domingo in 1904 to 1907, and Cuba in 1906. Of course, and Roosevelt is going to act as a mediator in the Russo-Japanese War in 1904. So the United States is really going to ante up their involvement in foreign affairs, and we're going to go into a period called big stick diplomacy, okay? And that's going to be where Theodore Roosevelt is going to use the African proverb, walk softly and carry a big stick, and you will go far. And this sums up the order of efficiency and faith in government um, of the Roosevelt administration. That, he's going to take his bully pulpit. I mean, what else can you say about a guy that gets shot in the chest before he's going to do a campaign speech, and then, still does it after he was shot? It's shot through his speech. He had it folded up, but, he's bleeding and he still gives a speech. So, Theodore Roosevelt embodied and was the culmination of years of manifest destiny and machismo and, all these things that eventually thus become this the apex of American exceptionalism. Okay, as America begins to launch itself as a world power. Okay, but with that said, I'm pretty sure that I left out a lot of things, and I want you all to uh, pay attention to a couple of things. First and foremost, that these are my views, not the views of TCC. That uh, these are this is my interpretation of the material, and this is a summation of the material. Okay, and then I sometimes may get things crossways when I'm doing it, but I don't think it happens that often. If you have any questions, make sure you ask me. Um, if you like the lecture, give it a thumbs up. Believe it or not, it does help. If there's any room for improvement, of course, there's a lot. Please tell me. And more importantly, I want you to be kind to each other and wear your masks. And this will be the last lecture for Unit 1, History 1302 and the Progressive Era. Your next lecture will be when we talk about Unit 2. I may do a review, and if I do a review, I will keep you posted. Okay? You all take care, be kind to each other, and wear your masks. Bye-bye.